successful and be competent in these different ways of communicating will be useful for you in terms of being able to relate and understand people and all that sort of stuff, and perhaps being successful in different platforms or spaces or whatever. But what I think is changing now is this whole notion of social media, Instagram, Twitter, all that sort of stuff, and that where many people used to express their opinions, whether it was coded a certain way or not, is being taken out of context or used against you, and people are attacking you, for things that you may have just been kidding or whatever. And when you go back to you're creating content, you are creating content of your own thoughts when you're writing, whether it's an email or a text, even text. Text gets out. We've seen text get out in public. We've seen Twitter get out in public. We've seen Instagram get out in public. When you say things that are, that will end up, being used against you, even if you think you're in confidence speaking to someone who is of the code that you think you're within, right? And so I would say that is something that we need to be mindful of. I think as we go on, this world is changing that way. Back when Wendy is saying, as a Gen Xer, we didn't have all this documentation, so to speak, now.
Right.
About our thoughts and the things that we would communicate with people. And I would, I might have said, well, I did. I said all kinds of things to my friends back in the day that I would never put in writing now. And that's because I know that is something that is not appropriate for documented communication. This is something you need to be aware of.
I mean, we see that right now, both in the politics, like, the Virginia situation, with the yearbook that came out. I know that's not Instagram, but Instagram could definitely be our version of that yearbook if you are using it in that way. That's coming out to haunt him now. We were talking about the Amazon owner, the Washington Post and the National Enquirer situation.
You also have the Google software engineer over the summer.
And it's not just
diversity training.
No.
His message was being interpreted one way internally, and that got him fired for just having an opinion, right? So how you communicate, you got to think about what you're saying in a whole different way now.
Wendy, you talked about privilege that you have in terms of, where you learn to communicate from a young age. And I think a lot of us, for the most part in this room, have that experience where we have connected with somebody that has given us the capital to understand how to communicate effectively, maybe at a younger age, maybe sometime in our adolescence or as an adulthood. My question is, what about the folks who don't have that capital to really understand what this means of code switching, to encode, decode? How do we engage the students, faculty members who don't know the importance of this code switching?
It's funny how everybody's waiting. Like you said, Wendy first, but Wendy's not. So my immediate thought, Adrian, is we have this conversation in our department a lot of meeting our students where they're at, right? Like if most of our students are using YouTube to communicate and to find videos and to do their live stream, and I teach online, how can I integrate those two platforms so that I'm meeting the student where they're at and I'm teaching them how to use the tools that they already have in their hands as ways to manifest their destiny? Right? And I think that that's a conversation too when we talk about power, and JP Morgan and Chase just was my example, but you now, each one of us, have the free ability to log on to a Gmail account if you're not anti-Google, right? And to have your own YouTube channel where you become the creator of your content. That's some leverage there in some way, shape, or form, but only if you know how to use the platform. So on one hand, we can be very critical of these digital businesses that are out there that are building, that are multi-billion-dollar, trillion-dollar businesses. But at the same time, how many of us have actually logged onto YouTube and went onto their free How to Become a YouTube Creator, and they give you 279 hours worth of YouTube, how to use the platform so that you can create opportunity for yourself. Right? So on the one hand, I think that there's this conversation. I asked my students in intercultural where I said, is the internet the great equalizer? Is the cell phone the great equalizer? And I thought my student was really astute when he said, it could be if you had access to that smartphone, if you had access to that, internet. If you had access to it, and then you had the knowledge of how to use that tool, the universe is ours, based, regardless, I think, of the challenges that stand. We can navigate that. We've seen people who have done that, you know, so.
Yeah, I think that, Adrian, to answer your question, right, access is really huge. And so speaking generationally, you didn't have access to some of this information that you have access. The world is a lot flatter with the internet and with the access that our students, that individuals have to gain those pieces of information. But I think you touch upon, there still is some social capital, there still are some steps and power dynamics in access too, right? If you are from a higher socioeconomic background, you're more likely to have access to those tools than if you're not. And so I think another piece to this, and this is for all the educators who might be live streaming and are in the room, we have to take into account when our students graduate from our institution here at MiraCosta, what are they graduating with? Is it expertise in that particular subject matter? Are our students able to walk into an interview and seamlessly be able to code switch and understand what the language is in that environment? Are they able to understand some of the power dynamics that we're talking about here? Are they able to understand how to network, right? We're not even going into that. That's a whole other workshop or presentation, right? The code switching also is connected to networking because you can't necessarily network with individuals that you can't communicate with. And so I think as educators, I think it behooves us that we have to understand the unwritten and underlying education that we need to make sure that we're instilling in our students, especially our students who are not coming from backgrounds where you're necessarily going to have access to that information. You might be the only person in the classroom, in your office, in a department, you know, on the front lines. You might be the only person that student has ever encountered who says, and I know Dawn is just getting teased for the loud suit, but you know, you might not want to wear that suit when you go to your interview. I wore loud outfits too, it was the 80s. But you know, that might be the only person that gives that feedback. So we have to understand kind of the unwritten curriculum and that we want our students to graduate with that. And that happens just in the everyday because there's not necessarily something that is formalized. That happens in our interactions with our students, and we can't take for granted that our students understand or know some of those steps. So knowing, for example, that my mother had me set a formal place setting every holiday, which was annoying to no end. She bought a formal place setting and had my sister and I set the table with a formal place setting. I didn't understand the power of that until I got into college. And I found myself at a conference at an environment with folks who had internships and jobs, and I could seamlessly move and know which was the salad fork and which was the dinner fork and which side my bread was on and which water was mine. And so I take time to try to teach students that information too. So our Puente program, our Umoja program, try to instill in students and anyone who will listen what those skills are. I'm not going to assume that just because you have an associate's degree or a certificate or have come to MiraCosta to take classes, that you're necessarily going to be able to graduate with that information. And for the students in the room, you know, you have folks who are here, part of the workshop, we're here as a resource, but there are a lot of resources that are out there that can kind of connect you with some of those pieces and to help put the pieces together.
I think that, just to add to that, I think that's part of what we do with our ACE programs. Programs like Umoja, taking students to professional. That's one of the things I highlight about the program. I don't spend a lot of time talking to students why we exist, or why we came into existence as a statewide program. I'm highlighting all the stuff that they're going to get as benefits from the program, and going to professional conferences and interacting with professionals, networking, and the importance, understanding the importance of that. That's all part of the process. And absolutely, we can't assume that. Matter of fact, I think it's probably best to assume that you don't. You know, because I mean, I was about 25, 26, 27 before that information came to me. And so it's important to recognize that we do have spaces that are available for our students to connect like that, yes.
You know, I think I'm stuck on power. I'm just going to keep on being in this space of, you know, how you were talking about, you know, that YouTube has, the internet, YouTube has allowed people who have not had voices before, have voices now, and you know, and giving a lot of power to those folks. And what's missed to me just with that is like, is to say what kind of internal power, because a lot of those voices who are people who are using just say YouTube, so I can stop saying all the other spaces. They do things out of the norm, right? Because there's these things called niches, and it's like you don't. It's like, look, if you're selling this thing to billions of people, you only need 0.001% of folks to actually like you in order to whatever, right? And so then, if they're doing things that are out of the norm, then how do we empower, right? How do we empower people to make not the decisions based on power, but to empower them to make decisions about how they want to represent themselves, and say, do you understand? Rather than say, yo, Don, don't wear that loud ass suit, because I'm just gonna keep on going in there. It's Don, do you know that there's this perception of people who wear these types of suits versus these types of suits? Do you see that there's different types of suits in this space?
Yeah.
Now, and the question goes back to you. Do you want to wear are you okay with wearing that suit? Because what I really hesitate and chafe against is the idea, because a lot of times when it comes to the code switching, a lot of the BSU folks and whatnot, people who have grown up in, I'm just gonna say it, a lot of black folks who are raised around white folks, and they speak, I'm gonna put it in quotes, white, and then they get around other black people who have not been raised in those same environments, and then those black folks who have not been raised in those environments, they're like, yo, you speak really white.
Mm-hmm.
Now that's
just a cultural
what is
observation.
speaking white?
That's what I was questioning.
That's just a cultural observation. The thing that really brings about power in that space, though, is when that person who's black person who's been raised by white folks says, oh, you just critiquing me because I speak correctly or properly. It's like, no. That's not correct or proper in the space that you're in.
Right, exactly.
The space that you're in actually demands a different type of language, and you're not there.
Yeah.
So I'm critiquing you, the power, and so therefore equalizing the power. And so, like I said, to me, then, my job as an educator is to make sure that people understand that there are power dynamics, and then say, what decision are you going to make in understanding what those power dynamics are, versus saying, this is the right way and the wrong way to do things.
100%, yeah.
I think that would be a better, I don't know about better, I just know that that's a different way of talking about code switching and really trying to empower the user, the student, versus just saying this is right or wrong.
Absolutely. I do think that a lot of people look at kind of the social media as economically it's going to be the great equalizer, but the best piece of advice that was given to me as an artist was don't chase the money, chase the dream. And I think if you figure out what you want your voice and your platform to be, and what you want your message to be, then you can encode that so that you can get enough attention to that 1.1% of the billion followers that you need, and all of a sudden, you're up there to where you are getting the type of attention and response that you want. That to me is where the empowerment comes from. I'm an optimist. I lean on that side, even though I very much understand that even these spaces that we talk about as being quote unquote freedom spaces, they have to undergo their own cultural kind of policing as well. YouTube had to start YouTube Black because there just were not enough Black representatives of YouTubers out there, right? So they've really put an effort to make sure that they are investing in a variety of voices that they're getting and not repeating the same single story, if you will. So.
And unfortunately, we got to wrap up just because it's about 1 o'clock, but we will continue to have the conversation and the dialogue, but I wanted to, I know that we have students who need to get to class and folks who might need to get back to work.
If you enjoyed this, if you could just kindly fill this out and then slip it in the back there before you leave.
And I just want to remind folks, this is one of many events for Black History Month. Unlike your child's school, we are celebrating and being loud and obvious about it. So MiraCosta.edu/Black History. Thank you for coming. We're going to continue the dialogue, but we just wanted to make sure to formally close it so that those that need to leave, we know can leave. Thank you.